Good morning. How are you doing today? You feeling lively, ready to go? Yeah? Because I like a lot of energy, So I was talking to my sister yesterday, and she said she'd bought these new trainers recently. And she's had them for like a couple of months now. She says, they were nice. I've been on holiday with them. I've been wearing them around town. And she wore them she's a teacher. She wore them for a PE lesson. And she said her TA that was with her started to it was just like looking at her trainers. Like Nicola's thinking, my sister's just thinking, what's she looking at? Why is she looking at my trainers like that? And then this TA, this lady comes over to her and says, Nicola, how long have you had these trainers? And she said, oh, well, they're quite new. I've had them a couple of months now. And she said, do you know they're different? Do you know they're odd? And she looks down, and she says she just realizes it's like a light switch moment, and she starts to notice all these differences. The trainers are from two different pairs put together. She says one of them's got like a lightning bolt on and the other one didn't. To be fair, they're a similar shade, but she said, I want to go and return them. Do you think they'll swap them? I said, well, what are you going to say? You've had them 2 months. She said, I've been to Florida in them, been walking around town in them, and now I've suddenly realized they're different and I want a proper pair. And I don't have my receipt as well, so I'm thinking, I don't know if they're going to go for that. But isn't it funny that she just, for some reason, she'd not noticed it? And I suppose, you know what, we can get used to things, can't we? We need to be able to see beneath the surface. Everyone's going to be checking each other's trainers now, aren't they? I mean, I'll wear odd socks sometimes, but I can cover those up, you see. I wouldn't tend to go out in odd trainers. But we need to look beneath the surface sometimes, because appearances can be deceiving, can they not? Yeah. Now, have you ever heard the phrase, you are what you eat? Yeah, I don't like that phrase, do you?
What would you look like?
Well, that's probably why I don't like it. See, I've got a bit of a sweet tooth. Esther just loves chips. You'd never think about it. Her favorite food on the planet is probably chips. I've got a sweet tooth. What would your favorite food be? If you were what you eat, what would they call you? I was thinking about this in my mind when I was planning that. I thought it sounds a bit like an insult because you could be. What if someone likes donuts? Like you're big donut. Like look at you, you. And so maybe someone's healthier, and like you look at you slimy salmon. It just sounded a bit like an insult. But there's this phrase, you are what you eat, and I suppose it makes sense, doesn't it? I suppose what they're saying is, if you're eating unhealthy, you could still appear healthy, but you might not be. Yeah. And I suppose there's a spiritual component to this as well. See, we looked last week a little bit at the church, one of the churches in Revelation, and how these spirits, these moods, these atmospheres can exist pretty much anywhere, and we can use them as a mirror, as a reflection, just to analyze our own hearts and to see what's going on. And Jesus has this issue with another church, as he does. And then he said that this particular church, they had this reputation of being alive, but spiritually, they're dead. I always find that really interesting because, for one, I guess we could look at the Pharisees because they had this reputation of being close to God, but I just think the language is interesting. They had this reputation of being alive, but spiritually, they were dead. And I think maybe we could see churches like that. Maybe we could see individuals like that, where we have this reputation of being alive, but inside, it's not that healthy. Does that make sense? Yeah? So appearances can be deceptive. So we've got to take a look on the inside to find out what's going on. Now, the Bible also says to guard your heart. So what do we like to say in the world? We like to tell people to follow their hearts, don't we? It sounds nice, doesn't it? It sounds sweet. Just do whatever's right, Just you follow your heart. You go with what your heart's telling you. But the Bible says guard your heart. And it also says to guard our minds. And part of this, I think, is like we've looked at in previous weeks. It's trying to build up that spiritual authority. It's trying to build up something within inside. It's trying to build up some strength. Because if we just sway from left to right with anything, if we just follow our hearts, we can be moved all over the place, can't we? It says guard your heart because whatever lives in your heart, everything else will flow from it. And it's such a big question we have to ask ourselves. And this is really for all of us, because we know, if we're being honest, what has the throne of our hearts, don't we? And I know we go over this every now and again, and we come back to it, but really it's because we never graduate from it. Because if we sorted that, if we fixed that, then we really don't need to be here anymore. Because as Nelson was saying, look, if we're not listening to God, then it's like we think we live in this passive space and we think, okay, well, I'll follow God, I'll follow God, I'll follow God. I'll just wait here now for a little bit because I'm tired, I'm weary. I'll just wait here. And it's like we think we're in this passive space, but actually that isn't what tends to happen. If we're not taking steps forward, we tend to just be moving backwards. And we might not even feel like it, we might not even realize it. But we think, I'll just have a breather because we like breathers. But if we're not moving forward, then this stuff, it can creep in. And it's the same with our heart. We've got to constantly go through this heart check, this health check, that how is my spiritual heart doing this morning? How would you answer that? Is anyone thinking it's healthy? I'm flying, it's the best. If we hooked up the machine to me, they would find that it is a very healthy spiritual heart. Or would some of us think there's some things in there that need working through? Now, when we look at the Acts church again, they had something special. Now, we're told in Acts 4, and throughout the whole thing really, that these people were being arrested, they were being told by the authorities to just stop what they are doing. Stop talking about Jesus, because it's messing up the whole system, it's messing up the whole society, and we don't like it. And what did they say? How did they respond? What do you think they said? They said, no. Like, we understand what you're saying, but we have to put God first. Even in the face of opposition, where we may be put away, we've got to go with what God says. Now, I think for us this morning, what would our heart be in that situation? Imagine someone comes in right now, an authority figure, and tells us, we've got to stop talking about God right now. How many of us would be thinking, don't you tell me what to do? I'm just going to do what God says. You might be doing all of that. You can arrest me, and it's not going to change anything. Or how many of us would be thinking, okay, like, I'll talk about it behind closed doors. You don't need to know. Do you see what I'm saying? There was such a different heart. And I'm not saying the answer is to become really overzealous and militant. I'm just saying the heart was there. That even in the face of opposition, they just thought, no, I will not let this discourage me from following what God has for me. And I've said before, I do think it is something that applies to our country, or maybe the West, but I do think there's a spirit of apathy upon the church. Not just this church, but just the church in general. Because when I look at the attitudes of us in the West compared to looking at the persecuted church or things like that, as much as it pains me to admit, because I am in this camp as well, the heart is just so different. We've had it before here. We've had people from Open Doors come. We've heard from Deb before. And some of the conditions, some of the situations Christians in around the world are absolutely terrible. And what we see is it emboldens them even more. And I think there's just something special about that. I mean, in our country, maybe the rain can put us off. Maybe an early start can put us off. But you look at this heart, it's so different. Now, just to really shake you guys up, Acts 4:32, it says this: all the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and God's grace was so powerfully at work in them all, that there were no needy persons among them. For from time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales, and put it at the apostles' feet, and was distributed to anyone who had need. Now, that's pretty shocking right there, isn't it? Communal living, and I'm not suggesting we do that. Can you imagine? We live in a very different society now. We get that. But the point is, the heart was there. Something in them thought, this thing we call church, we want it to be a reflection of God's kingdom in heaven. We want it to be an embassy. The way we think heaven will function, the heart, the attitudes, the values we think we will have in the new kingdom, in the new age, we want something of that to be apparent in this thing we call church, in this community. And what we saw in their situation is they viewed each other purely as equals, that they honored each other higher than themselves. And their culture, bear in mind, when you look at the culture, when you study it, it was what scholars would call an upward bound race for honors. That was the system they lived in, that it was all about increasing my status, increasing my authority, my power, because that would give me an upward bound race for honors. And what people wanted was greater honor in that society. So when we see this, it's not just a nice thought where we think, oh, they're all sat around singing Kumbaya, they're all sharing possessions, isn't that nice? That's lovely. No one had any need. Great. It's actually completely flying in the face of the system that was there, and which is exactly why the authorities didn't like it. They were saying, this is not how you live. What you do is you put yourself first, you elevate yourself, and you do not concern yourself with your fellow person. And their system, their community, did the exact opposite. It said, no, I'm going to elevate people. I'm going to elevate others more highly than myself. I'm going to treat people as I want to be treated. That is incredible, isn't it? See, we looked at this last week. There was many amazing signs and wonders and miracles that took place in the early church, but there was also an incredible heart that we just can't gloss over. See, our actions are so influenced from our heart. As I said, I know that the situation was very different, and I don't know how many of us would get on with communal living these days. Who'd be cooking tonight? That'd be a big meal every night. But look at the heart. Look at the heart, though, and compare it with yourself and think, God, where are areas where you just want to light me on fire again? Because we've got to be honest with ourselves. We can go through this thing we call church and faith and Christianity. I've been brought up in the church, so I've been through pretty much every mood. I've been through I'm on fire for God, this is amazing. I've been in well, I'm used to this. Another week of God loves me. It doesn't change anything in my life. I've been in God's coming through, God's doing amazing things. I've been in well, God's just not doing anything, is he? Maybe I'll give something else a go. I've seen it all. I've seen the people that are on fire for God, singing and dancing, go outside and, give someone the fingers on the way out. I've seen someone that can be really closed and passive, and you think they're not enjoying this at all, but be the most godly character on the outside. There is a heart that we can't deny. This is amazing. What I haven't really seen is the Acts church. Not fully. We see glimpses of it, but I've never seen that in any church I've been to. And over my 33 years of being involved in Christianity, I've seen quite a few. And I've just never really seen that heart. Not fully. Maybe an individual will embody it here or there, but what would a community look like if we could do something like that? Do you think we'd start to see amazing things happen? Because I do. I think there's a complete connection. I think it just makes sense. Because we studied this at Bible college, and one of our lecturers who spent his life really looking at Pentecostalism, and he said that there seems to be a connection between the persecuted church and miracles and signs and wonders. He said what we found is when he was conducting research and going to church, looking and researching, he said what we found is for some reason in the West, when there wasn't a reliance on God, he didn't show up. Does that make sense? What we saw is in some of these underground churches, in persecuted churches, because there was no other way but to be reliant on God, he said they were just seeing things take place. And something just dropped in my spirit, because it makes sense. You think, in what way am I robbing God of that reliance, really? Because in many ways, we're very blessed in this country because we've got many things taken care of. But at the same time, does that create an apathy? And I know some of us, we might be in situations where the only way out will be through God. And in those moments, that's where we've got to band together and really pray to see him move. So I wonder if you could put it on a scale of 1 to 10 right now. If Jesus comes in and he says, how reliant are you on me? What would we say? Well, in what way? He says, is your heart just reliant on me? Because when we look at these people here, they didn't even necessarily know what life would look like next year. With the authorities closing down on them, their whole system changing, and they just kept pursuing God. They said, it does not matter what my environment looks like. I just want to follow you. I think that it moves me. Now, there was a great individual in the early church called Barnabas, and his name meant son of encouragement, didn't it? So that's why they called him that. He was an encourager. And whenever we bring up Barnabas, I always have to ask the question, what would people call you? What would people call me? You think a fair person, because there's probably some people that have always got names for you. But what would a fair person call you? An average person who just knows you in a nice way. What would they say about you when you're not there? Would they say, oh yeah, Jane, the encourager? Or would they say, I can't pick someone out, can I? Would they say, Barbara, the boring? You know what I'm saying, don't you? What would they say about you? Because Barnabas, because that's who he was, because he was so uplifting, he was an encourager, you go to him, he would just have some words for you, and he was selling fields and looking after people. They named him, you are the encourager. What would they call us this morning? Now, we try and work hard as a church. We want to, some of our journey is that we've been trying to, kind of put ourselves back on the map, get involved in the community. I think over time it's easy to become just a backdrop for your community, for your locality, and people just don't even see that there's a church there. The amount of people I've spoken to on the street, and then they'll be like, I didn't even realize there was a church here. And I'm like, are you kidding me? You walk past it to go to the dentist. Like, we need a flashing sign. Everyone is going to get their teeth done. It's like, we'll do a heart check for you if you want, right here. But it can become a background, a backdrop. So part of our, modern strategy, though I really hate that kind of stuff, is you have to put some level of effort into advertising and marketing, promotion. You've got to try and you've got to use the things there. But do you know what the greatest advertisement is you. You are the biggest advertisement of God, if you want to use that corporate language. You are the biggest ambassador of God. And what I've found is, people who know you are a Christian, they will watch everything you do. You might not think they do, but they do. They see everything. Like, you are under a microscope. In your place of work, if people know you're a Christian, they're watching, It might not even be from a bad place, but they are watching. They are watching to see, how do you react to things? Because they have some awareness of the book, and they know the Bible says you need to be loving people. You're meant to love your enemies and bless your enemies. How are you reacting when things go wrong? Because they watch everything. Isn't that amazing? And the reason that they're watching is because there's a curiosity, and they want to see that you really believe it. Because if they look at you and think, well, they clearly don't really believe it, then guess what? They're not going to want to believe it either. Because they'll be like, well, Barbara at work, honestly, she's so boring, and the minute anyone says anything, she just shuts them down. I thought, she's not got the joy of the Lord in her heart. I don't want anything to do with it. People watch you. The way you are the biggest testimony that the church can have. You're the best advertising that the church can have. So I wonder, in your life, do you make a bit of a splash at places? Do people look at you? Have you ever had someone stop you and say, there's just something different about you? I remember when I was a student, it gets further and further away that, when I used to say that, like it was only a few years ago, like 10 years since I was at university now. I remember when I was a student, and you're a typical poor student, because I didn't have much money at all, and my friend Nick, and he's an amazing guy, he's just off traveling the world. It's like, rub it in, why don't you? We're in rainy Clay Cross, which I love, Lord. It is a great blessing to be here, Lord. But he's off traveling the world, and I remember we were back at uni, and he's not a Christian or anything. I guess I don't want to, maybe he's agnostic, I'm not sure. And he'd sometimes talk to me about my faith, because sometimes he'd think that I was a bit mad or a bit silly and things like that. And he knew that I would give a lot of time to churches. Before I was a pastor, and the churches I was involved in, I'd give a lot of time to it, I'd give a lot of energy to it. And I'd tithe, I'd give financially. And when I'm trying to tell this stuff to my friend Nick, he just thought he didn't get it. And he was worried about me, as you would be. But he would always come back to be like, why? So why do you do that? Why do you give so much time and effort and energy and money when you've not even got much money? Why do you do that? And all I could really say was because I just really believe it. I think, and though I'm not in that space, though I'm not really at the level of the early church, when I see those people, I think they are on fire for God, and they looked different. And I felt God just remind me, do not be upset or ashamed when you look different. Because in that moment, I looked different from Nick, from this amazing guy, from my fellow friends at uni. I looked different. My life looked different. And he would say, why don't you do certain things? And it would come back to my faith. And there was a part of me that felt a little bit embarrassed. I didn't want to go into it. I thought, well, let's just not talk about it, because I don't want the weirdness, the awkwardness. And God, he just had to tell me in that moment, don't be ashamed when you look different. And sometimes maybe you're going to be in the workplace or an office or just in the shop or anything. Don't be ashamed when you look different. Because the early church, they looked so different. And people did not like it. The authorities did not like it. But they looked different. Why? Because they were following Jesus. I think we can have a pressure to just be the same, to not rock the boat. And it's good to maybe not rock the boat, I suppose, depending what it is. But the point is, when you really follow God, when you want to give him your all, and we all fail in different areas, so don't condemn yourself, but when we want to try and give our all to him, the reality is you will look different. And some people won't get it. And that's okay. Because actually, that might be doing more than anything else. It's good when someone notices. See, Nick, at least for him, he could tell that I believed it. Because if I didn't, he'd have picked up on that and said, well, actually, you don't give any time, you're not involved, he would be able to tell. And I've had more conversations with him about faith and God because of how we were together at uni. Then imagine if I'd have just stayed hidden. Does that make sense? There was like a graduation. I remember at school, I was full-on stealth Christian, okay? But I was only young, it was school. So I was full-on stealth mode. But don't be afraid to let your life look different. Because when God is moving through you, it will. And I believe that God does have big plans for this church, for something significant. I think the way our journey's been, I think you can see God's hand on it. It's been a very almost biblical-esque kind of story that we've had some issues, some troubles that we've had to work through, and God's just reset the whole ground. And I know we said a few weeks ago about the healing of the land and the little prophetic image we had from the sunflower seeds and Pam and Barry and just certain individuals, we've just been slowly setting a new foundation. And slowly is absolutely fine. You know, some people don't like slow, I get that. But if you're wanting to build a community, if you're wanting to build a church where you can tap into the heart of God, where you want something to be around for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, it is important to get those foundational things right. And just like with your own faith, with your own heart right now, if the reason you're not growing is because just something in the heart, in the foundation isn't right, let's just take some steps to just remove that block and put something else in. Even if you can only do one thing at a time, just focus on getting those foundations right. Because the early church, they really did. And ultimately, if we're not building things on the right foundation, we won't see that stuff. I can't be like a salesman for you and be like, oh, just keep doing X, Y, and Z. But the reality is, if we don't have the right foundation, we won't see God move to that level. Because He doesn't owe us that. You know, we can be in the club, we're saved, we're with Him. But if we want to see Him move in a way that is truly going to make a splash in the area, in the nation, that's truly going to set you apart, it does require some deep digging. Does that make sense? We're going to take communion in a moment. And again, we do this every week, but please don't just let it be the motions for you. Let it be a real time where you analyze your heart, your own heart. And you can make a decision to say, God, in this area, I've been neglecting it. I've just been leaving it again and again, but I want to make a decision to just give that to you today. And whether or not you last until Tuesday or Wednesday, look, make a decision and you just try it. Because we can always come back to Him. That is the amazing thing. He is the best Father ever, with His arms always wide open. That's amazing. Because we can go out and fail on our Monday or Tuesday and Wednesday, and Thursday morning He's still there like, let's give this another go.